Hello everyone, and welcome back to my 7th and final Vintage Cube Top 10 list. You know, I have a small kid at home, he's 4 years old, and he likes to watch Blue's Clues, and I'm starting to get like a lot of sympathy for Steve, the actor in Blue's Clues, just talking to a camera and pretending there are people out there this whole time. It's a little weird, you know? It's kind of a little bit lonely, but I love talking about Cube, so I am back, and I'm gonna do one more list. Today's list is the top 10 additions. I spent a lot of time thinking about this list. I spent a lot of time thinking about ways to change cubes. And the Vintage Cube, I think, is a very good list, but I still think there are ways that it could be better. And because of that, you know, Wizards, hire me. Hire me, Wizards. Bring me in. I want to make some tweaks to your cube. If anybody out there at Wizards is watching, give me a call. So starting off at number 10, this is a card that I'm not sure is good enough for the Vintage Cube, but I don't know if it would be good or not. My own personal cube is kind of a powered up legacy cube, and it doesn't have a lot of the signets in it, which I think are too good, I think, for a normal cube, and take away some of Green's specialness. So I don't know if it would be good, but I think it might be good, and it's worth giving a shot, at least for maybe just one iteration for the Vintage Cube to see if it has a place. And that is Bane of Progress. Bane of Progress is it's a creature they printed in a Commander product. It might be a year ago, it might be 2 years ago, and it's 4 colorless and 2 green, so it's 6 mana total. But when it enters play, it blows up every artifact and every enchantment on the board, and it gets bigger based on how many that it blows up. And I think this might be an effect that the green deck wants and needs in the cube. They already have a card called Conclave Naturalists in the cube, which is, it's a 4/4 that costs 4 colorless and 1 green and just blows up a single thing. And I've played that. I've played that in the green decks quite often, just because you need those effects so much. And if you have something like Green Sun Zenith, you can tutor for it into play a lot. And so I think Bane of Progress is just an upgrade on that, or maybe just another addition of that type of effect in the cube. And you know, I think it might be good. I don't know if it's good or not, but I think it has a chance. And the green deck needs something to ramp in. And this is a creature that they can ramp into and might blow up 2 or 3 of their opponent's permanents, and it might just be very good that way. So coming in at number 10 is Bane of Progress. I just want to see it in action just one time. Coming in at number 9 is a card that I have in my own personal legacy cube. It looks, oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, it looks so good in the alpha frame, and that is Ankh of Mishra. It's a cheap artifact, but when it comes down, what it says is that anytime any player plays a land, it does 2 damage to them. So it's a symmetrical effect in much the same way that Sulfuric Vortex is a symmetrical effect, but it's just so good. And it's so important. I think it works great in the mono white deck, and it works great in the mono red deck. It punishes the dirt elite decks that are comboing out on turn 5 or turn 6 and are just trying to control the game by then. It's just consistent damage, it comes down early. It's not so overpowered, like Sulfuric Vortex is obviously one of the best red cards, but nevertheless, if you top deck it, it's not quite as good. This is kind of the same way. If you top deck it, it's even worse than Sulfuric Vortex because they might have 5 or 6 lines in play and not need it at all. But on turn 2 on the play, Ankh of Mishra is just, it's a huge beating for the white or red deck to have in play. And obviously it won't look quite as good on mono, but nevertheless, it looks really, really good in that old frame with that old art. It just evokes, you know, it evokes a vintage cube kind of feel. You know, it's got a Mishra, you know, one of the original brothers, you know. Ankh of Mishra, it's flavorful, it's strong. I think it should be in the vintage cube. Coming in at number 8, this is a card that I added to my legacy cube on a whim. My legacy cube has a pretty good support for the Reanimator deck, and it just surprised me at how good that it is, and that is Magister of Worth. This is a card, it's another one of those kind of weird Will of the Council voting cards, but really what it says is, when it enters the battlefield, blow up all other creatures. So it's Wrath of God, but comes strapped to a 4/4 body, so it's 4 colorless, 1 white, and 1 black. And this is a reanimation target that I have loved to have in my deck. I find it to be really good in the recurring nightmare decks, but even just like sometimes I've won games where, you know, I've cast Magister of Worth on turn 6, blowing up all their creatures, right? And then they kill it and they play more creatures and I reanimate it, boom, I blow up their creatures, and like the advantage that you get from it is often just really hard for decks to come back from. The fact that you get to blow up maybe 2 of their creatures while at the same time getting a 4/4 body that they have to deal with or trade with, you know, often means that it's a 3-for-1, and you can have some really fun reanimation shenanigans with it. I know it's really good in my own personal Legacy cube. I think it's good enough for the Vintage cube as well. At the very least, I think, you know, replacing something like the 6-mana Winvala, for example, is just a shoo-in as a great replacement. So coming in at number 7 is a card that I think has proven itself a lot in the Wizards Legacy cube, and I think it deserves a chance in the Vintage cube to prove that it is good enough. That is Master of Waves. I've seen it win a lot of games in the Legacy cube. It plays really well with opposition, like opposition into Master just wins the game instantly. But it's just a solid creature, and it gives the blue decks like a kind of a different angle to attack from. You know, even just going click into Master of Waves can let them have a very aggro start if they need it, but they can still be aggressive. They can still be defensive and have something like Jace into Master of Waves, or whatever. So obviously there's not quite as much support for it. There's fewer blue permanents in the Vintage cube than there is in the Legacy cube, but nevertheless, I think Master of Waves has a chance of being a pretty good card. Coming in at number 6, I think the Vintage cube is just a little bit light on permission. I think it's obviously I think it's much better than the Legacy cube, which is way too light on permission spells. Counter spells, for those of you who know them that way. And I think the Vintage cube is just a smidgen too light on them. And so what I'd like to see are a couple more. My personal preferences are for Spell Snare, which I think the cube could really need. It might just straight up replace something like Mental Misstep or Delver of Secrets, but I think it would be really, really, really strong in this cube, where when you're on the draw, being able to counter one of their signets will keep them from like way out tempoing you if you're playing blue. So I think Spell Snare is a definite addition to the cube. It's almost never dead. Like almost every single deck is going to play a 2-drop in it. Memory Lapse, I think, is a really good, like for the blue-red tempo deck. You get to kind of, you know, if they spend like 4 or 5 or 6 mana, kind of like Remand, often what you're doing is you're just you're time walking them. Like you're just taking away a whole turn and they have to draw the same card. They have to cast the same spell over again. So Memory Lapse, I think, is a permission spell that's strong. It's strong enough, but it's not like super busted. You know, but if not, like Memory Lapse, something like Miscalculation, something like that. I don't think they want to have too many more counter spells. Like I don't want. I like having a little more interaction in my Vintage cube games, and having too many counter spells I think can be a little bit unfun. But nevertheless, I think it's just a little bit light to counteract some of the combo decks. So Spell Snare and Memory Lapse, I think, are the 2 I would add. So coming in at number 5 is, and I'm not really picky on which particular one that they use because there's so many of them, is that the cube desperately needs a red sweeper effect that's not Wildfire. It needs a Pyroclasm or an Anger of the Gods. Just 1, maybe 2 of these effects, like a Kozilek's Return maybe, would be really good. I think would be a good fit for the Vintage cube. I think the blue-red control decks are kind of robbed for sweepers. You know, there's a lot of them, I think 2 or 3 of them, I think, in the Legacy cube, but there's just none of them in the Vintage cube. I think, you know, just having 1 or 2 of them would give those decks just a little bit more game. Just like having a pure, you know, blue-red control deck. That doesn't necessarily even need to have Splinter Twin in it. But they can't do it with the sweepers they have. Like 1-for-1ing themselves with Burn is just a little bit tough. And so being able to like wipe away a couple creatures early on with a Pyroclasm effect, I think would be very strong for that deck. Something like Kozilek's Return will also work really well for the mono brown deck. But overall, I think there needs to be some red sweeper in the cube. I know that they've been pushing the amount of sweepers down, and I think that's good, because you don't want to make the creature decks unplayable, but I think you want to have at least some sweeper effects in red. Not too many, just a few. So coming in at number 4 is kind of a combination of cards. These are both in my Legacy cube, which has less artifact ramp than the Vintage Cube. There's no signets, and yet they're great, I think, in my particular Legacy Cube, and I think they would be great in the Vintage Cube. You know, one of these was outstanding, probably the best card in the entire Legendary Cube, and that is Maelstrom Wanderer, which is, you know, an 8-mana creature that gives all your creatures haste. It has double Cascade and Destructive Force, which is basically a bigger Wildfire. So instead of costing 6 mana, it costs 7. Instead of blowing up 4 lands, it blows up 5. And instead of doing 4 damage to every creature, it does 5 damage to every creature. Both of these I think would be great for the big rampy decks that you would see out of Mono Brown. Maelstrom Wanderer would be fine actually for the green deck that just like splashing red and splashing blue, where it's like a great card for that deck. But I think these two together, I think, are what the brown deck needs, I think, to give it just a little more oomph in the cube. I think that the really nice thing about Maelstrom Wanderer is that it's a card that none of the other cheaty decks want at all. You can't channel it into play because it costs 3 colors. You can't, I mean, you can show and tell and sneak attack it into play, but it doesn't do much. You don't get the cascades unless you cast it. So the only deck, and you can't reanimate it because, I mean, you can, but again, it's just a 5/5 creature. You don't get the double cascade unless you cast it. So it's a card that only the big mana decks want, and for those big mana decks, it's just so good. You know, it can cascade into a Wildfire, it can cascade into a Balance, you know, whatever it's doing, it's gonna do something, cast something busted, hopefully, and then come into play and then just kill them, you know, in a couple turns. So Destructive Force, to add some support for it, but particularly Maelstrom Wanderer is a card I want in this cube. Coming in at number 3 are a set of cards that I think the white deck needs more of, the red deck needs more of, and the green deck needs more of. And that is creatures in particular but sometimes spells that maybe do damage, but like creatures that blow up or Oblivion Ring type effects on artifacts or enchantments. There's just not quite enough in the Vintage Cube. So I'm thinking of cards like Destructive Revelry, maybe, I don't know if it's quite good enough, but things like Viridian Shaman, or maybe some kind of effects like this that maybe will hopefully exist in Kaladesh. I don't want to have too many of these. Like, you don't want to have so many cards like Reclamation Sage that the artifact decks are unplayable, but the white, red, and green decks really want to be taking their opponents off of their game plan with these cards, and there's just not enough. You've got a couple in green, you've got, I think, just 1 in white, you've got a couple in red, and the red one costs, you know, the creature dies to blow up a thing, and that's Torch Fiend. And you have Phyrexian Revoker. There's just not enough little creatures that, you know, shut off artifacts, and I think there needs to be 2 or 3 more in the cube. I don't know what they are. There's a couple that exist historically that might be good enough. They're kind of expensive, but it needs to be 3 mana, maybe 4. Conclave Naturalist is at 5. I still play it because I have to, but I think the cube needs some more cards like that at lower mana costs. Coming in at number 2 and these are cards that I have in my Legacy Cube to help support that Mono Brown deck, the Mono Brown Wildfire deck, so it can be its own archetype. And those are just some more artifact ramp cards. I think there are 3 that I believe are better than all of the rest. And these are cards that I think they're the kind of cards that the Mono Brown deck wants, but that the other decks don't want quite as much because they're worse than Signets. And that is Mind Stone, Chromatic Lantern, and Cold Steel Heart. I think you could probably even replace like Everflowing Chalice and put these 3 in. I think that would give that brown ramp deck just a couple more cards that they get. But nevertheless, like maybe other decks want, like Chromatic Lantern is just great for like the 5 Color League type decks. But just having just a couple more brown ramp things for that deck, artifact ramp spells for that deck, I think is just what it needs to be a competitive deck that consistently will be a 3-0. I mean, that has a chance of being 3-0. I think right now that brown ramp deck, you know, unless you have 2 Wildfires and a Balance or something like that, I think it's really tough for that deck to consistently go 3-0. It's fun to play, but I think it's just not quite good enough. And I think if you just add a couple more mana rocks for that deck, I think it could be a great deck. So coming in at number 1 are, I think, they're a set of 5 hate creatures that you know, I talked a lot about the mono white deck and how I don't think it's quite good enough. I think just the addition of these 5 cards, you know, you could take out Linvala, you could take out the big one, you could take out like Academy Rector, Archangel of Thune, Moat, and Leyline of Sanctity. But none of those cards I think are very good in the cube. You just take those out and put in these 5 Hades type creatures, and I think just by doing that, I think you can make the mono white deck competitive. So the cards that I'm thinking about, there's 3 that are pretty good. I think it will certainly be playable in the mono white deck. So Aethersworn Canonist, the new Thalia, I believe it's Heretic Cathar, and Gadok Teeg. I think all of those are fine Hades type creatures. But more importantly, I think the cube really needs Kataki, War's Wage. Kataki, you know, it's just really hard for decks that are just playing signets because they want to ramp to get ahead with. It forces those decks to be more interactive because they must have removal spells for things like Kataki. It's just solidly good. It's an effect that doesn't hurt the white deck nearly as much. I mean, they might have a Skull Clamp or a Jite or a Sword or a Batterskull, but they're not playing like 3 signets like a lot of decks are trying to do just to get to their treaty cards faster. Kataki, I think, is the perfect kind of hit card for white. Even better than possibly Kataki is a card that I honestly, I can't believe it's not in the cube. It sees play in Legacy, it sees play in Vintage itself, and would really put a crimp and give the white deck so much play against the cheaty decks, the Reanimator decks, and the Sneak Attack decks, and that is Containment Priest. This card is exactly what the white deck wants. It's perfect. It shuts those decks off. It forces them to be interactive and actually play against the white deck instead of just letting the decks kind of sail by each other in the night. You know, the white deck plays out some creatures, the Reanimator deck ignores them until they have a Grizzlebrine, and the white deck can't win at that point. Instead, the black deck needs to play more removal. The Sneak Attack deck needs to play more removal. You know, it's certainly killable. Like, there's no reason you can't kill a Containment Priest, but it might blank a Reanimation spell. It acts as kind of a counterspell a lot of the time. So Thalia, Aethersworn Canonist, Gadok Teeg, Kataki War's Wage, and Containment Priest, I think those 5 together would be a great addition to the cube, would give that mono white deck a lot more power. I think it would be a consistent deck that people would want to draft a lot. And I would love to see that. I would love to draft that deck. I like drafting mono white. I just don't think it's quite good enough in this cube. And I think if those cards were there, I would definitely be drafting it a lot more often. It would be a solid archetype right up there with the mono red deck. So wow, 7 days of 7 videos of top 10 lists of the Vintage Cube. I hope you all have found these interesting. I hope they've provoked some really interesting discussion. I'm hoping that Wizards is listening and, hires me, brings me in, or, just maybe takes these suggestions to heart and brings them into the Vintage Cube or gives them a shot in the Vintage Cube. Take out some of the cards that are a little bit, chaffy, I think. That just don't quite belong there. I hope that people who are new to Cube have found the worst cards and best cards in archetype videos really helpful to give themselves some directions. And for those of you who are, experts at Cube who have drafted it as many times as I have, I hope that this has really provoked some righteous indignation on how I have hated on your favorite cards, particularly Hero of Bladehold. Hero of Bladehold, Marshall, stop drafting Hero of Bladehold. Just don't do it. No, just kidding. It's a fine card. It's a fine card. I just think it's not quite as good as people think it is in the Vintage Cube. But anyways, I hope you all have had fun. This was a lovely time. Hopefully the Magic the Arbitrine will have me back for another set of videos when the Legacy Cube comes back. And honestly, if you're out there listening, Worth, who is the person in charge of the Magic Online, I think, I know that I've heard it described, I think by you, maybe by somebody else at Wizards, that Cube is like ice cream. If you eat it every single day, you're gonna get sick of ice cream. But I'll be honest, I never get sick of ice cream. I never get sick of ice cream, and I never get sick of Cube. And while I recognize that, if Cube were there all the time, it definitely wouldn't support 4,000 people like the Vintage Cube does now, right? There probably won't be 4,000 people always active in the league, but I think you could probably have like a couple thousand people like myself who only want to do cube as their limited format. You know, put together half a dozen cubes, a dozen cubes, you know, cycle them through every 2 weeks or 3 weeks to give people variety on cube. I think you would find that there's an audience that wants to just cube all the time, especially if you increase the prize support. I think the prize support is a little weak for the cube leagues. The rake is 30%. You know, 800 play points go in and only 560 come back to the players. You know, if you had that be half of that, you know, if 800 went in and 650 came out, you'd have a phantom format. I think that people will play again and again and again. It doesn't mess up the online economy. You know, maybe it could award some QPs. That would be nice. I have a lot of trophies. At this point, I would have at least a dozen QPs to play in the next thing. I think that would be great. But I think Cube deserves, I think it's earned the right to be a format that is on Magic Online all of the time. You just need to come up with, you know, a variety of cubes, either do more community cubes or, you know, look on Cube Twitter, take inspiration from some of those cubes. You could even, like, you know, take some of your sets. You could have like the Ravnica cube. You could have an Innistrad cube that just brings them all together. I think there's a lot of great options. I don't think it would be hard to have a dozen very unique cubes that people would want to play all the time and would constantly be fresh. And I don't think it would suck away from, you know, the regular draft formats like you know, Kaladesh and stuff, because I think there is just a community of people that just want to cube. That's all they want to do. They don't care about the other formats, and those people I think are really underserved by the current cube format. So that's my little rant. Wizards, you should hire me. I will fix all of these cube problems, or at the very least, send me an email and ask me for advice. I'd be happy to help out. People on Reddit and Twitter, you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at AprilMPLS. On Reddit, I'm Marumari, M-A-R-U-M-A-R-I. I often comment on the threads for the cube. But I look forward to hearing from you and see you all for the next set, hopefully with the next cube coming out soon. Bye.